Johnny was not worth buying this time,
Genesis chapter 30, fairly long chapter, so is the next one and the next one. So we'll cover as much as we can. So, Genesis chapter 30, verse 1 says, When Rachel saw that she was not bearing Jacob any children, she became jealous of her sister. So she said to Jacob, Give me children, or I'll die. Jacob became angry with her and said, Am I in the place of God? Who has kept you from having children? Then she said, Here is Bilhah, my maidservant. Sleep with her so that she can bear children for me, and that through her I too can build a family. So she gave him her servant Bilhah as a wife. Jacob slept with her, and she became pregnant and bore him a son. Then Rachel said, God has vindicated me. He has listened to my plea and given me a son. Because of this she named him Dan. Rachel's servant Bilhah conceived again, and she bore Jacob a second son. Then Rachel said, I have had a great struggle with my sister, and I have won. So she named him Naphtali. Then Leah saw that she had stopped having children. She took her maidservant Zilpah and gave her to Jacob as a wife. Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a son. Then Leah said, What good fortune. So she named him Gad. Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a second son. Then Leah said, How happy am I! The women will call me happy. So she named him Asher. During wheat harvest, Reuben went out into the fields and found some mandrake plants, which he brought to his mother Leah. Rachel said to Leah, Please give me some of your son's mandrakes. But she said to her, Wasn't it enough that you took my husband away? Will you take my son's mandrakes too? Very well, Rachel said. He can sleep with you tonight in return for your son's mandrakes. When Jacob came in from the fields that evening, Leah went out to meet him. You must sleep with me, she said. I have hired you with my son's mandrakes. So he slept with her that night. God listened to Leah, and she became pregnant and bore Jacob a fifth son. Then Leah said, God has rewarded me for giving my maidservant to my husband. She named him Issachar. Leah conceived again and bore Jacob a sixth son. Then Leah said, God has presented me with a precious gift. This time my husband will treat me with honor, because I have borne him 6 sons. She named him Zebulun. Sometime later she gave birth to a daughter and named her Dinah. Then God remembered Rachel. He listened to her and opened her womb. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son and said, God has taken away my disgrace. She named him Joseph and said, May the Lord add to me another son. After Rachel gave birth to Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, Send me on my way so I can go back to my own homeland. Give me my wives and children who I have served you, for whom I have served you, and I will be on my way. You know how much work I have done for you. But Laban said to him, If I have found favor in your eyes, please stay. I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you. He added, Name your wages, and I will pay them. Jacob said to him, You know how I have worked for you, and how your livestock has fared under my care. The little you had before I came has increased greatly, and the Lord has blessed you wherever I have been. But now, when may I do something for my own household? What shall I give you? He asked. Don't give me anything, Jacob replied. But if you will do this one thing for me, I will go on tending your flocks and watching over them. Let me go through all the flocks today and remove from them every speckled or spotted sheep, every dark-colored lamb, and every spotted or speckled goat. They will be my wages. And my honesty will testify for me in the future whenever you check on the wages you have paid me. Any goat in my possession that is not speckled or spotted, or any lamb that is not dark-colored, will be considered stolen. Agreed, said Laban. Let it be as you have said. That same day he removed all the male goats that were streaked or spotted, and all the speckled or spotted female goats, all that had white on them, and all the dark-colored lambs, and he placed them in care of his sons. Then he put a 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob, while Jacob continued to tend the rest of Laban's flocks. Jacob, however, took fresh branches from poplar, almond, and plane trees, and made white stripes on them by peeling the bark and exposing the white inner wood of the branches. Then he placed the peeled branches in all the water troughs, so that they would be directly in front of the flocks when they came to drink. When the flocks were in heat and came to drink, they mated in front of the branches, and they bore young that were streaked or speckled or spotted. Jacob set apart the young of the flock by themselves, but made the rest face the streaks and dark-colored animals that belonged to Laban. Thus he made separate flocks for himself, and did not put them with Laban's animals. Whenever the stronger females were in heat, Jacob would place the branches in the trough in front of the animals so that they would mate near the branches. But if the animals were weak, he would not place them there. So the weak animals went to Laban, and the strong ones went to Jacob. In this way, the man grew exceedingly prosperous, and came to own large flocks, and maidservants, and menservants, and camels, and donkeys. So, it's pretty sordid. The story just goes from bad to worse. Laban deceived Jacob first time, obviously, with Leah. He worked for Rachel, but Leah was given in instead. Now they're both trying to pull a fast one. But it's not only the men, the gals are too. Now it's not even about a relationship with the husband, it's a competition with the sister. They really don't care too much about Jacob, evident by the manipulation that's going on. So I don't think Jerry Springer could write a show any more sordid than this. It's not that God gave approval to any of this. It's just a record. It's a recorded account of Jacob, who will become Israel, and the 12 patriarchs. And the very fact that it's recorded for us should give us great hope. Because this is who God started Israel with. Sinful people, just like us. But ultimately, as he walked with God, Jacob will become a man that's surrendered or submitted to the Lord. And hopefully that's true of us. But it's quite a journey. So we'll go back and break it down. Sorry about my slurring. I went to the dentist, and I'm a little numb. Verse 1 says, when Rachel saw that she was not bearing Jacob any children, she became jealous of her sister. No doubt, for the first time in her life, she's jealous of Leah. Rachel's been the one that's beautiful by sight and form. Men have flocked to her. She's been the popular one. For the first time, she understands what it is to feel jealousy. And she is jealous. Leah is producing children, which in this culture especially is a sign of God's blessing upon your life. Barrenness is a sign of God's judgment. So she's very jealous right now of Leah. So she said to Jacob, give me children or I'll die. Excuse me. Jacob became angry with her and said, am I in the place of God? Who has kept you from having children? Jacob's response is, obviously it's not me. I'm having kids. Something's going on with you. What can I do about the situation? It's out of my control. Rachel's obviously going to the extreme. Give me children or I'll die. As we continue to read, when we get to Benjamin, it's having children that ultimately cost her life. Many times we think the thing that we have to have, that we're so focused on, if we don't have that, I'm going to die, can be the thing that ultimately cripples us. It's foolishness. We can't run after things, even as great as a child is. That's a huge blessing from God. That's not going to bring the satisfaction you desire. Because we just bring another little sinner into the world that causes us trouble. Children are wonderful. They're a blessing from God, and we should have a quiver full. But that's not where you're going to find your satisfaction. Not in marriage, not in your job, not in your houses. None of that is going to ultimately bring satisfaction. She believes that it will, and she's misguided. But Jacob's angry with her. And many times when we put pressure on our spouse, especially, we got to get this, or I'll die. I'll just clue you guys in a little bit, especially you ladies. When you say, man, I would love to have a new couch, that's not what I heard. I heard, I want a new couch now. And many times, that puts an enormous amount of pressure on me to go get that couch. That isn't what my wife said. She said, I'd love to have a couch. That's not what I heard. So then you're putting pressure on your husband to acquire that thing for you. And many times that leads to the struggle. to the difficulties, to the conflict, because, well, I don't have money for the couch right now, but I'll figure it out. See what I'm saying? Jacob says, it's out of my control. Lady, I'm not the problem. God has stopped up your womb for whatever reason. It's up to him. I do also want to point out, as we go through the story, many times when women, for whatever reason, are not having children, they wind up adopting, and then they get pregnant. And I'm not putting my place in the place of God, but it could have been that God was developing. He may have wanted them to have that adopted child as well, but it could have been that God was saying, just wait upon me. Build your faith, trust in me. And they jumped the gun. God blessed it anyways. Now you have 2 children to raise up and to love. But many times I think it wasn't necessarily God's plan. It's just our impatience. It's either got to happen now or it's never going to happen at all. And you can remember back when you were 18, 19, 20. The world's passing me by. I'm not getting anywhere. I'm never going to amount to anything. My kids are going through that right now. And it's simply not true. But we believe that in our heart. That if I don't get married right now, I'm going to be an old maid. It's just not the case. But we're very impatient critters.
Chinese loaned children to their friends that were barren for that very reason.
Yeah.
And they'd stay with them sometimes a couple of years, and then all of a sudden
They'd have kids.
they'd have kids.
Or decide, you know what, I don't want kids. That's too much trouble. One or the other. It either cured them or... So, verse 3 says, Then she said, Here is Bilhah, my maidservant. Sleep with her so that she can bear children for me, and that through her I too can build a family or have a child on my knee, as King James. Ultimately, she's saying, I have to have this. This is something that is critically important. In this particular culture, a handmaid or a servant of your wife could be given to your husband as a concubine or a wife. It's kind of a gray area. Technically, she's your wife, but she bears children for your wife. The slave does. So, and that's another amazing thing about God's grace is He is going to build 12 tribes from this mess. It's not like it's Jacob and Rachel's kids or Jacob and Leah's kids. It's Jacob and Leah and Bilhah. I mean, it's pretty sorted, but that's the grace of God. He says, even in the midst of all this confusion and mostly your selfishness is what this boils down to, I'm still going to do an amazing work. I'm going to create a nation from this mess. So, verse 4, So she gave him her servant Bilhah as a wife. Jacob slept with her, and she became pregnant and bore him a son. Then Rachel said, God has vindicated me. He has listened to my plea and given me a son. Because of this, she named him Dan, or judge, literally is what Dan means. So Leah's still got some ground on her. Obviously, she's had a few more. But Rachel's saying, okay, game on. Now I'm starting to score some touchdowns here. I'm catching you. And God is judging between the two of us, ultimately. And He's seeing that I'm in the right. We're going to see that nobody's right here except God. Rachel's servant Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. Then Rachel said, I have had a great struggle with my sister, and I have won. So she named him Naphtali. Or my wrestling is literally what Naphtali means. So we see that this really has nothing to do with Jacob and Rachel. Their love for one another or their desire to build a family, but the competition between Rachel and Leah. That's really what this is about. That is no good way to build a relationship or a marriage. Competing with the neighbors or competing with your sister. And we all have a tendency to do that. My brother's extremely successful in Oregon. I mean, he's so busy, he can't keep up, making money, building a big house. And I find myself competing with him. Not that I want to. I'm so happy for him, and I'm so proud of him. But on the other hand, I take a step back, and I look around, and I go, maybe I should be a mechanic. Maybe I should fly helicopters. Because it seems that he's not struggling as much, or at least he's being blessed more financially than I am. That simply is not the case. Ben is doing what God has called him to do, and he has his own set of struggles. his own difficulties, because his parts bill is more than I make in a year each month. So he has those things to work with. So there's an old saying, grass is always greener on the other side of the fence, but the water bill is always higher too. So yeah, we gotta just look at what God's blessed us with, focus on that, and hopefully be happy for those around us that God is blessing as well. Rachel there's no joy in her heart for Leah. All there is bitterness and anger and competition. And we got to make sure that's not in our heart as we look around. When Leah saw that she had stopped having children, she took her maidservant Zilpah and gave her to Jacob as a wife. Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a son. Then Leah said, "What good fortune." So she named him Gad, or troop. So, again, another touchdown. I'm ahead. I'm doing more. I'm getting more kids than you are. It's a terrible situation. Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a second son. Then Leah said, "How happy am I? The women will call me happy." So she named him Asher, or happy. Obviously, because within this culture, the more kids you had, the more blessed you were by God. So the women are going to say, this is amazing blessing from God. During wheat harvest, Reuben went out into the fields and found some mandrake plants, which he brought to his mother Leah. Rachel said to Leah, "Please give me some of your son's mandrakes." So mandrakes are, I obviously haven't been there to see them, but in the Middle East, they're kind of like strawberries, or at least they grow like strawberries. I guess they taste more like a kind of a carrot apple mix. But they were thought to be aphrodisiacs as well as help women with fertility issues. So when Rachel sees them, she really wants them, mostly because we're still in competition here, and maybe if I eat them, then I can conceive and have kids. So that's why these mandrakes are so important. Verse 15 says, But she, Leah, said to her, "Wasn't it enough you took my husband away? Excuse me. Will you take my son's mandrakes too?" "Very well," Rachel said. "He can sleep with you tonight in return for your son's mandrakes." So let's just go a little further. So when Jacob came in from the fields that evening, Leah went out to meet him. "You must sleep with me," she said. "I have hired you with my son's mandrakes." So she slept with him that night. God listened to Leah, and she became pregnant and bore Jacob a fifth son. So it kind of backfired a little bit on Rachel. She thought, if I can get these mandrakes, then I'm going to score another touchdown. So she traded her husband for the night to her sister Leah, who became pregnant or got the touchdown. Many times we've got it all figured out. Man, if I just do this and this and this, and the more you manipulate the situation, the more it just continues to bite you instead of the one you intended, because it doesn't work. Whatever a man sows, that's what he'll reap. And we need to be seeking God, not our own wisdom. Man's wisdom leads to destruction constantly. We think we've got it figured out. This is what I need to do to get ahead, and it bites us. Here it bit Rachel pretty bad. Verse 18 says, "Then Leah said, 'God has rewarded me for giving my maidservant to my husband.' So she named him Issachar, or hire. Literally, his name means hire. So every time that they called little Issachar, it would be a reminder that, to Rachel especially, remember when I had to hire our husband to come to me, and here's the result of that. So it's a reminder of deception, really. It's a little bit of a gouge to the whole family, the whole situation. I do want to point out that Leah believed that God had heard her or blessed her for giving her maidservant away. And that's not what the scriptures say. The scriptures said that God remembered Leah. The struggle that she's been through. God is not honoring the mess, but he is loving the kids. He's loving his children. He's trying to direct them. He's trying to show his love and who he is and his desire for them. But in spite of their rebellion, he's still their dad. And we got to remember that too. No matter what my kids do, I would walk into a prison to visit Wyatt after he had killed 50 people. He's still my son. And I would still make that effort. And if I'm God's kid, that's how he views me. Sometimes we think that we love our kids more than God loves us, his kids. I must have done something wrong. God must be done with me. He must not be pleased with me. What did your child do, or what could your child do for you to say, I'm done with you? You're not my child anymore. Well, if that's possible, it is with man, not with God. Once God has called us his kids, we're his kids. And he's going to bless us, but he's also, as a dad, I know the consequences of my kids' actions. And I know the pain that it's going to bring into their life. And that's why I'm constantly telling them, don't do these things. They're painful for you. And that's what our Father is telling us. He's saying, avoid them. Don't go that way. That's going to be painful. It's going to hurt. It's not going to end the way you think it will. But you're still my kid. And I'm going to be here to pick up the pieces when you do. And we're going to work through it. But then you're going to live with those scars that you just acquired. So, Leah conceived again and bore Jacob a sixth son. Then Leah said, God has presented me with a precious gift. This time my husband will treat me with honor, because I bore him 6 sons. So she named him Zebulun, or habitation. So she thought for sure, this is 6 that she personally had bore Jacob. She thought, this is it. This is what's going to acquire the love of my husband. And ultimately, as we'll see, Jacob does fall in love with Leah, to the point that that's who he wants to be with till the resurrection, which he was looking forward to. But I don't think it was based on the kids that they had, but on the relationship they had developed. Most divorces, even within the church, end when the kids leave, because that's what tied them together, was the baseball games and, the math and laundry and dinner. And then when the kids are gone, the husband and wife look at each other and go, now what? What are we going to do? We don't have anything in common. We didn't build a relationship between you and I. And that's a danger. It's something that's very possible in every marriage. That's why we have to make sure that our kids are important to us, but this relationship is second only to this relationship. And that's hard as a parent, because they're whiny little turds. They just want our attention all the time. That's our focus all the time. Yeah. And we think, well, as soon as they get out of diapers, it'll be so much easier. No, because then they're just running amok. And then you got staples and stitches and broken arms and casts. And then we think, well, once they finally figure out how to use their feet, we won't have so much trouble. No, then they got basketball games and football games and proms. And then we think, well, as soon as they get out of high school, no, then they're going to college. And then you're going to really start paying. And then they get married. And then sometimes they come back home, dragging more people with them. It's just an ongoing thing. But that relationship really has to come second to this one. And I know that I have failed in many ways of putting this relationship before those little rugrats, just because there's such a demand. So we just have to be careful. I don't believe that it was the kids that were produced by Leah and Jacob, but the relationship that ultimately developed between them, and he had a true respect. He honored her because of who she really was. Not the outward beauty, but the inward beauty that she presented. Excuse me. Sometime later, she gave birth to a daughter and named her Dinah. I don't have a lot to say about Dinah except for she's in kind of a rough spot. She's between all these boys, and she's the only girl besides the wives. So she's probably very, very spoiled by Jacob and everybody else. So we're going to look at that a little bit in a few more chapters. Verse 22 says, Then God remembered Rachel. He listened to her and opened her womb. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son and said, God has taken away my disgrace. She named him Joseph and said, May the Lord add to me another son. And that's literally what his name means. May God add. In other words, all she had been talking about, what she told Jacob is, give me a child or I'll die. God finally opens her womb, gives her a child, and she says, okay, now I want another one. And that's always the way that we are. We're never satisfied. If I could just get this job, then I'd be happy. We get the job, and if I could just get a raise, then I'd be happy. Now if I could just get a corner office, and it just keeps going on and on and on because we're fickle. I'm praying that God will show me to have godliness with contentment, because that's great gain. We're constantly told by the world, great gain leads to contentment. Well, I've studied enough history, and so have you. I mean, just turn on the television and look at any athlete or any rock star or country star or any of them. Do they seem content with what they've achieved? It's always just one more. The multi-billionaires in our country are not happy till they get at least one more billion. Then I'll be content. And it just never happens, because it's only through godliness with contentment that we have that great gain. So there's nothing wrong with the stuff we acquire unless the stuff we acquire isn't enough. And that's something we have to measure for ourselves. Am I content? Am I happy? It's not that we don't have ambition and drive and that we have a desire to do all that we can for the Lord, but it's that we're content right here. This is enough. Right here. This church. This situation. This is enough. I'm not looking for a way out or the next big thing. I'm not opposed to God doing that, but I'm not looking for it. That's how we have to be, or how we should be. It's just happy. She should have just been overjoyed with Joseph and said, this is it. God has blessed me, and now I have a son, my own son. She named him, may God add another one, which is kind of a shot towards Joseph. Verse 25 says, after Rachel gave birth to Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, send me on my way so I can go back to my hometown, my homeland. Give me my wives and children for whom I have served you, and I will be on my way. You know how much work I have done for you. But Laban said to him, if I have found favor in your eyes, please stay. I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you. Now, I don't know how much divination it required. Common sense would suffice, because before Jacob showed up, Laban was kind of a small man with a small flock and small herds. After he got there, after these 14 years, now he's a wealthy man. So I don't know if it came through divination or if it just was common sense that obviously God is blessing you. And there are many that are not believers that we work for or that we're around, and they can see clearly there's a blessing on your life, and it comes from God. Laban's not a believer, as we're going to see, but he had enough insight or enough common sense to say, I need this guy to stick around because I'm being blessed as a direct result of his presence. Hopefully that's how we are as Christians. We should be the best employees anywhere. And that's who God sought out. If you remember, throughout the scriptures, Moses was tending flocks. Elijah was behind a plow. Peter was fishing. Matthew was collecting taxes. He finds people that are busy, that are working, that are laboring. And then he steers that ambition, that drive, in such a way that it brings glory and honor to him. Doesn't mean that he reduces it. A lot of people say, I'm not hiring Christians because they're the worst employees. They're always going to retreats. They're always going to a prayer meeting. I'm like, that shouldn't be. We should be the best employees. We should be getting there early and staying late, doing things that aren't required of us. Because when we do, the Labans of the world go, there's something going on here. And I need this person in my life. And hopefully that leads them past us to the one who has empowered us to do what we're doing. So, Jacob said to him, verse 28, he added, name your wages and I will pay them. So he says, name your price. Jacob said to him, you know how I have worked for you and how your livestock has fared under my care. The little you had before I came has increased greatly, and the Lord has blessed you wherever I have been. But now, when I do something for my own, I just keep screwing that one up. But now, when may I do something for my own household? So Jacob's basically saying, there's a little bit of negotiation going on here, obviously. He's saying, name your price, Jacob, and I'll pay it. Jacob says, you know how it's been since I've been with you. Everything's going great. God's increasing everything. But now I need to do something for my family. Now I need to step out. Laban says, what shall I give you? Don't give me anything, Jacob replied. But if you will do this one thing for me, I will go on tending your flocks and watching over them. Let me go through all the flocks today and remove from them every speckled or spotted sheep, every dark-colored lamb, and every spotted or speckled goat. They will be my wages. So the most common are solid, goats and sheep. Once in a while you get a speckled one. Jacob's saying, I'll take the least common in the herd, and that will be my wage. It's a pretty fair trade. For both parties, truthfully, because Jacob would be getting a fair wage, Laban would be getting the lion's share, Jacob would be doing the work, Laban would be getting the benefit. So he has the herd, he has the land, it's fair. So it's a good deal. Verse 33 says, and my honesty will testify for me in the future. Whenever you check on the wages you have paid me, any goat in my possession that is not speckled or spotted, or lamb that is not dark-colored, will be considered stolen. So he's saying it's easy for you to check my wages. Just go through the herd. If I have anything that isn't light-colored, striped, or a dark lamb, it's yours, not mine. So this is an easy solution, which is why Laban agreed. Let it be as you have said. That same day he removed all the male goats that were streaked or spotted, and all the speckled or spotted female goats, all that had white on them, and all the dark-colored lambs, and placed them in the care of his sons. Then he put 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob, while Jacob continued to tend the rest of Laban's flock. So did we catch that? Laban went through everything, made sure that he removed his wages, and then sent him 3 days' journey away. So we see the character of Laban. He said, this is a good deal, but we're going to start now. Not take into account what you have in the herd, but now we're going to start. So he removes everything that truly was Jacob's and sends it 3 days away. So he's trying to rip Jacob off. Well, he did rip Jacob off. Verse 27 says, Jacob, however, took fresh cut branches from poplar, almond, and plane trees, and made white stripes on them by peeling the bark and exposing the white inner wood of the branches. Then he placed the peeled branches in all the water troughs, so that they would be directly in front of the flocks when they came to drink. When the flocks were in heat and came to drink, they mated in front of the branches, and they bore young that were streaked or speckled or spotted. Jacob set apart the young of the flock by themselves, but made the rest face the streaked and dark-colored animals that belonged to Laban. Thus he made speckled flocks for himself, and did not put them with Laban's animals. Whenever the stronger females were in heat, Jacob would place the branches in the troughs in front of the animals so that they would mate near the branches. But if the animals were weak, he would not place them there. So the weak animals went to Laban, and the strong ones went to Jacob. In this way the man grew exceedingly prosperous, and came to own large flocks, and maidservants, and men servants, and camels and donkeys. So does that work? Putting streaked branches in front of the critters make them streaked? No. But God took care of Jacob. Laban wanted to rip him off. That was his plan. So Jacob said, okay, then I'm going to rip you off. And that's how we are, how foolish we are. We truly need to get to a place where we're not so worried about how we're being treated, but how we're serving God and how we're treating others. Kendra and I decided, mostly I just decided for us, that I don't care how you treat me. We never asked how much we were getting paid to go to Russia until we landed in Russia. I had no clue. As far as I knew, I could be taking a huge loss in pay. I just knew this is where God wants us to be, and I don't even want to know how much. I don't want to know the job, because that might get me to change my mind. I've never asked when somebody said, can you come to our church and teach? I never said, well, what does it pay? I don't care. You guys could totally just rip me off. That's not my problem. That's yours and God's, and I'm going to let God do it. I've never once asked anyone for a raise at any job, because I'm trusting that God's going to take care of it. And there's been plenty of times that we have gotten ripped off royally. And it's hard. It's hard to swallow that. But I've just told my family, let's just trust in God. Let's not worry about that. Let them do what they will. Let Laban do what he will. But if I turn into Jacob, now that's going to have a negative effect on us. God honored Jacob in spite of Jacob. Jacob was trying to do his thing. Again, manipulation. He was trying to maneuver and get in a spot where he could get one over on his uncle. You try it yourselves. Go strip a bunch of bark and put it in front of your cattle and see if you have some striped cows. This is not factual. This was something that Jacob thought would work. And unfortunately, it did. But not because of Jacob's ingenuity or his wisdom, but simply because of God's grace, protecting Jacob and allowing him to become a mighty man. So, what I'm saying is, just because God honors some of the things that we do, doesn't mean that was his best for us. That doesn't mean that that's what he wanted from us. It just means that he's still our dad. And even though we make some dumb decisions, make some wrong moves, we don't base anything that we do off of our wisdom. Everything we do should be according to his word, because that's what's going to protect us and truly give us wisdom and understanding. So, it's a crazy account, and we're not done yet. We have several chapters to go where this family just gets kookier and kookier. Like, what? Why are you? What's going on here? And we see ourselves in Jacob and Leah and Rachel and Laban, and that's why God's recorded this for us, to show us that it's nothing that we can do. It's nothing that we are. It's all about what he has done on our behalf and what he's willing to do if we'll just trust him. So, it should give us all great hope and encouragement that Jacob becomes Israel. Heel snatcher becomes governed by God. And that's what we have. We have that choice every day. So, I would encourage you, maybe examine your life right now and see if there's a Laban in your life that's just every time that you turn around, he's trying to rip you off. He's trying to get something from you. And then decide what you're going to do about it. You going to get even? Or are you going to leave it alone at the foot of the cross and say, Lord, I just trust you. You lead me. If you want me to stay with Laban, I'm going to stay. If you want me to leave, I'm going to leave, but I'm not going to attack him. I'm going to let you deal with it. That's my counsel. So, that's all I got to say about that. Let's pray. Father, we just we come to you humbly and ask you to search our hearts and reveal to us where we're at. I think many times we can be Jacob and Laban, Rachel and Leah, just so focused on acquiring or proving ourselves, competing with our neighbors or our friends or our family, that we lose sight of the relationship that should be the most important thing. Rachel and Leah had no relationship with Jacob right now because they're competing with one another. And what a waste of time. God had a plan for this family, but the family got in the way, and now they're going to pay a price for it. I just pray that we can be humble before you, completely surrendered, ready to do your will, and avoid some of the problems and the scars that we seem to create. So, just guide us, Lord. Give us a humble heart and a meekness so that we're quick to seek you, slow to speak, slow to become angry, quick to listen to you. So just lift up everyone here tonight. Bless their week. Give them the courage to stand firm on the word. In Jesus' name, amen.